Hello, welcome to Irish Agility, a platform where we simplify Agile, a platform where we break down Agile related concepts to the granular level. So today I want us to look at a very important topic. As a Scrum Master, how can you get your team prepared? How can you get your team ready before PI planning? We all know the beautiful role that we play as a Scrum Master during PI planning. But even before those two crucial days, right? How do we get the team prepared so that when we come during PI planning, right? Boom, we are good to take off, right? So let's look at how do you help your team prepare for PI planning. Number one, determine your average velocity. Why do you have to determine your average velocity, right? Before PI planning, think about it, right? Your team will be working on maybe a number of features designed to deliver some business value, right? Either to the organization or to the customers, right? So your team will be assigned some features. But however, business will need some metrics, some guidance to be able to determine what features will be assigned to your team. And that will be done based on your team's average velocity. What is the average velocity of your team? Might be for the past 3 sprints, for the past 4 sprints, for the past 5 sprints, depending on your environment. So you want to make sure that you're going through your team's report to actually identify their average velocity. Make sure you communicate that average velocity to your release train engineer so that business can make appropriate plannings based on what features will be assigned to your team. Number two, make sure that there is what we call proper feature handover. Proper feature handover. What do we mean by that, right? Before PI planning, during the IP sprint, the innovation and planning sprint, which is usually the last sprint of every program increment, make sure that you're working with your business owners, making sure you're working with the release train engineer, the business owners, so that there is a proper feature handover, right, to your teams. Your team should know what features, in other words, they will be planning during the 2 days, what features they will be taking into PI planning. You as a Scrum Master, create a forum where you guys can meet so that you guys can go over the expectations of those features. You guys can go over the business requirements. What is business expecting your team to deliver out of those features? If you guys have any questions, that's an opportunity to get any clarifications on the business requirements, the feature expectations, the feature acceptance criteria, and all those good stuff, right? So you want to make sure that work with your team, work with the business owners to make sure there is a proper feature handover. And very important, make sure those features are fully funded. I've seen situations where teams come during PI planning, right? They invest that quality time in planning. Then at the end of the day, they have to stop implementation of that feature. Why? Because there are some funding issues, right? So you want to make sure that you're working with business to make sure your features are fully funded. Number three, make sure that you're creating the team breakout rooms and send out invitation. These are just meeting links, guys. If your team will be using Teams, right, make sure you're creating out the breakout rooms, meeting invitations, send it to your team ahead of time. Communicate the PI planning date to your teams. They should know exactly when your PI planning plans to occur. They should know where they will be joining during the breakout rooms, right? Make sure you're communicating this, make sure there's visibility, everybody has access to it, right? So as a Scrum Master, those are some of the things you'll be doing before PI planning, right? Number four, work with the team to have a planning board. What do I mean by a planning board, right? During those 2 days, you guys will be breaking down your features into stories. You guys will be identifying your capacity, your load, your rates, your dependencies. How do you plan to capture that information, right? have a planning tool. It might be a Miro board, it might be a PowerPoint presentation, right? It might be a Word document, right? Whatever tool, there's so many planning tools out there. Identify one, make sure you have that board ready as a team before PI planning. Don't wait for that day to start thinking what are we going to use. Make sure you identify that planning board, right, for your team, right? It's very, very, very important, right? Then number 5, make sure as a team you guys are having a pre-PI feature grooming. You don't want to wait for those 2 days before you start having discussions around those features. Work with your team to schedule, to find a day where you guys can come together even before the PI planning, well in advance, to go around those features, right? Look into those features. Maybe there are still some issues that you need clarification from business, right? That's why you're coming. Even during that grooming, you can start identifying your dependencies and communicating those dependencies, right? You can stay ahead of the game. Make sure you don't overplan, because if you overplan, then you're defeating the purpose of PI planning. The goal of that grooming session is to start socializing with the features, right? They say familiarity breeds content. Number 6, identify your radiator sheet for PI planning. What do I mean by radiator sheets? Remember, during PI planning, you'll be involved in 2 breakout rooms. During those 2 breakout rooms, you will be answering crucial questions, right, from the ROTE, right? The goal of the Scrum is to answer, how are you progressing towards your plan? That's a team. Have you started breaking down features into stories? Have you started identifying and communicating dependencies? Those are the questions, some of the questions you'll be answering during PI planning. So it makes sense to know, to have a look on this sheet even before your PI plan. Identify these sheets, make sure you keep them somewhere you can actually have access to them, right, before your PI planning. Remember, you've been watching most of my content, right? I always advise that as a Scrum Master, right, what will separate you from other Scrum Masters is your ability to stay prepared. Prepare well ahead of time, right? And last but not the least, number 7, which is very important, work with your developers to identify their availability. Why is that important, guys? Everything we plan revolves around what? Capacity, their availability to execute. So you want to make sure you're working with your developers to clearly capture days that they plan to be off across the entire program increment, across the 10 weeks, across the 12 weeks. Hey, Edwin, I want to start planning on our capacity. So what days do you think you'll be off for the next 8 weeks, right? You do that across your entire developers, right? So that you can plan your capacity well ahead of time. Also, make sure you're working with business if you're new to the organization, right? To identify, observe, know the days that they identify as holidays. If you have offshore team members working with other vendors, right? Make sure you also know the days that they observe as public holidays, so that you factor those days into your capacity, right? And most importantly, right, work touch base with your developers just to get the feel. How are they feeling towards the upcoming PI? How are they pumped during the upcoming PI, right? It's also time for you as a Scrum Master to start thinking. If you have any icebreakers, any games you want your team to play during the PI planning, this is that period, right, to start thinking on what possible games you want to get your team play, on what collaborative tools you want to use, right? Remember, a participatory PI planning is a goal for a beautiful plan, right? So you want to make sure you're identifying ways, right, that will get your team engaged. Guys, if I've missed anything on this, please feel free to add in the comment section, right? Just as a quick recap, PI planning starts even before PI planning. What do I mean by that? If you prepare well before PI planning as a Scrum Master, as a team, then your PI planning will run smoothly. And what are some of the things you can do to prepare as a team before PI planning? Number one, identify your average velocity and communicate it to business. Number two, make sure there is a proper feature handover from business to the respect to your team. Number three, make sure you're creating your breakout rooms invitations. Make sure your teams know where and when to join. Number four, work with the team to have a planning board. Number five, make sure you organize a feature grooming with the team so that your team can actually groom your feature, actually get used to the feature before PI planning. Number six, make sure you're familiar with the information radiator sheet that you'll be using during your Scrum of Scrum. Number seven, work with your developers to identify their availability to enable you plan their capacity. And last but not the least, gauge your team members' tempo as they are approaching PI planning. Guys, if you found this content useful, please, I'll appreciate if you subscribe. Go in the comment section, suggest other possible topics you want me to come on here and present, and I'll gladly do so. Peace. And if you're looking for one-on-one coaching, then I'm your guy to go to. Peace.